So let me start off with the car care organization, as that is both the largest change as well as the change that triggered some of the others. And I'm going to go through some background on it. I want to start with a number of slides that I used for a review with the LET back about a month ago. It was almost a month ago today. I gave them my assessment of where we stood with the car care business and my recommendations going forward. Today's announcements are essentially a fulfillment of those recommendations. But to begin with, the car care business is a different business from Shell's core business. It's not part of the petroleum or energy industry. It's something that Shell acquired when it acquired Pennzoil Quaker State. And as a distinct business, I think it needs to have its role within the portfolio well understood and on a periodic basis assess to see whether is it really achieving those objectives. And a very important and I think very encouraging message is as we go through this analysis and you see where we ended up on it, the entire LET reviewed this and affirmed that the business has the potential to fulfill these objectives, and it's important. It's adding a lot of value to Shell, and it's something that we need to fix. And so I think that's, once again, a very positive message. But the objectives are, first, it should be an accelerant for our performance. It doesn't have the oil drain interval issues that we face in the lubricants business, especially in the core PCMO business. It's something that does have natural category growth, and therefore we should be able to realize revenue and earnings growth that is additive, that is incremental to our core lubricants business. And the international car care business is essentially trying to extend that equity or that opportunity that much farther into the non-U.S. markets. The second objective is that we should be able to strengthen our core lubricants business through the customer advantage, and I'll be talking about that, illustrating that a bit as we go through these slides. But that customer advantage should be strengthening our lubricants position, and I believe that it is. The final objective actually is more of a requirement than a contribution made by car care, and that requirement is it shouldn't be presenting risks to the group, to the business, in terms of safety, regulatory compliance, etc. And that's more of a minimum standard that needs to be met rather than something that the business is providing to us. So those are really the three objectives, and you'll see later how I stoplight our performance on those measures. To give you some background, this is our performance over the past 4 years in the car care business in North America. Have been masked, as we do with many of our figures that we show. You'll see that in both the revenue and in the C5 profitability, the numbers are an index to 2001. But you can see that that our growth was modest through the early 2000s, so to speak. It was a compound annual growth rate of about 1.8% for the first few years, and then it slowed down a bit in 2004. We had, well, it's very difficult to get the numbers. The background for those who've been with the organization for some time, came from the PQS side, would know we had really phenomenal growth through the 90s. If I remember correctly, the accessories business was growing at, by 18 to 20% a year compound from about 1990. So it was growing very quickly. We intentionally slowed that down, to be honest with you, in early 2000s because we found that we were adding a lot of complexity to the business. We needed to get the margins fixed because we were growing quickly and the profitability wasn't growing. So actually I came into this business at the end of 2001, car care, and I said, we got to get the margins up. And you can see, looking at the right-hand side, we had some pretty darn good performance. For a couple of years. Profitability at the C5 level was up 42% cumulatively over those 2 years, but we had a turn for the south last year, and there are a number of reasons for it I'll touch on in a second, but that by itself gives us pause to reflect about what's changed. Looking at that performance for last year, I'm looking here at gross margin at C3 compared to plan. You can see we had a going from 2003, a 9.5% increase planned for last year. 9.5% after 19% compound annual growth in the previous 2 years seems like a reasonably modest objective, but we fell quite far short of that and in fact ended up 14% below the prior year. And something more like 25% below plan. So it was a very disappointing year. The key shortfalls were in volume and also in the cost of goods. Once again, this is all indexed, and you can see some of the factors. The factors themselves, in and of themselves, aren't really as important as it is that it was very clear, especially those people who were involved in it know, that we lost a lot of sight over our cost of goods trends. We weren't really linked well between our knowledge of those costs and our actions in terms of pricing. And essentially, what I found at the end of the year going through it was that we had gotten to a stage, especially with the globalization of the organization, where the different parts of it were distant enough from each other. We weren't solving the problems in a very integrated, tight, organic manner, that things were too removed. And you can't run a business like this in that kind of a distant, separated manner. You have to have the left and the right hands working very closely together with very quick reaction times if you're going to be successful in it. Certainly our competition's operating that way, and if we're not operating in a similar manner, we're going to be disadvantaged. But this is very important for us. This chart ranks the by line of business and by region how much profit at C5 we make. And you'll see here the North American car care business as a standalone business would be the sixth region in the world. Number one, even taking out the car care business, would be the Consumer North America business, then the transport business, and then EU stands for Europe, AP stands for Asia Pacific, LA stands for Latin America. So it's quite a significant sum of money. It's large. In other words, when it falls 15% short of year ago and 25% short of plan, it means something important. And conversely, if we can get it to grow at a significant rate, it is serving as a meaningful accelerant to our growth, which is exactly the role that it should be playing. Now, this chart speaks to how this provides advantage to our core lubricants business. And because so much information is available with Walmart, I'm focusing on that. But it's the same situation is true in a slightly different way, but very true with many of the other national accounts that we have out there in AutoZone and Advance and CSK, etc. But the values that it adds for us are, first, that it really supports our category captaincy. That is evident because what it does is it broadens our view, our perspective over the category. It makes us a more natural partner for the customer to select. Because when you look at lubricants alone, we are not the natural category captain. When you're looking at that DIY category, Castrol today, hopefully not for long, but they enjoy a larger market share than we do, and they would be by default the natural category captain. What happens is because we increase our breadth, our horizon over the category. We obviously aren't looking at things like, batteries or tires or whatever, but the accessories and the chemicals business are very important businesses for the retailers out there, especially given the amount of money that they make on it, the margin on it. It doubles or triples the perspective that we can provide these retailers. And then on the right-hand side, actually, that is based on hard information, because Walmart shares with us, as they remind us as we begin every meeting, how they're doing with our products. And if they're not doing well, that's our problem to fix before we ask them for any favors. But we know how much money we make on our products, and they share with us quite openly how much money they're making on our products. And this was a staggering figure for the LET. This really drew a lot of people up short, because if you look at the Shell perspective, 69% of our gross margin comes from lubricants and 31% from car care. It is striking. As a percentage of revenue, the gross margin is within 1/10 of a percentage point between the two. We make almost identical percentage gross margins between lubricants and car care. In other words, that mix that you're looking at there is reflective of our revenues into Walmart, and this would include the transport and even industry sales into Walmart, not just consumer. However, when you look at that same performance from Walmart's perspective, because they make a 40% plus margin on car care and a much smaller margin measured in the teens on lubricants, 85% of the profit that they make on the products that we sell them come from car care. In other words, if we didn't have the car care business, we would be a lot less important to them than we are today. And the same thing is true with AutoZone. The same thing's true with Advance, et cetera, et cetera. So this really is a very, very important foundation for us in our relationship with these major retailers. I've covered the first point beneath the chart, but I think that the test of this, or the proof of this, is coming through to some degree in terms of the results. Probably the best example of that, and one of the great unsung synergies since the acquisition, has been the growth of the Rotella brand in the major national retailers. It's been up, I think it's over 20% on a compound annual basis over the last 2 years, which is really us taking advantage of the intimacy and knowledge that we have with these retailers because of this category captaincy, and is paying dividends for us in the transport line of business. I'd also say on a more avoidance standpoint that that relationship we have helped us avoid what otherwise could have been quite a significant negative event last year when we got the signals that the Quaker State brand wasn't performing well in some of them, and they gave us some helpful suggestions that we reposition ourselves in the marketplace. That is the kind of advance notice and dialogue that, frankly, if we didn't have that relationship with the customers, we would have heard about all this too late to have been able to take any action. So this was a very, very important review for the LET. Now, if that's all very positive, I've got to turn to something that's not as positive in looking at where we stand from a compliance and safety and legal risk standpoint. This is a review. This conclusion was triggered by a review that was done at the end of last year, and really got my attention as well as supply chain's attention. I'm going to cover it very quickly, but basically we do not have our house in order here. Our product specifications are informal, non-existent, certainly not as tidy as they need to be for us to be running the proper organization. Our quality processes are not where they should be, and our roles and responsibilities are ill-defined, and that's probably been most visible as we change the portfolio, as we introduce new products, etc. The comment here, you may find it difficult to read, but it says that the accountability is split across brand marketing, innovation, sales, supply chain operations, procurement, distribution. And when you have such divided accountability, you oftentimes have very poor performance because nobody's accountable, everybody's involved. The exposure that presents to the business is both financial, reputation, legal. It's multifaceted, and this, along with the business performance, are really the two critical causes or drivers of us recognizing that we need to make this type of a change. So let me also touch on international here. All the rest of it to date really applies to the U.S., but the main reason why Car Care International is being rolled into this global organization is because if we're going to create this combined entity across sales and supply chain and marketing and everything, we're going to create this entity and do the same thing from a supply chain standpoint internationally and all the rest of it, then it makes sense to pull the whole thing together. However, also, the performance over the last 2 years on supply chain has been mixed. I mean, what we have is when you step back and look at what was inherited there's been a tremendous amount of progress. I mean, they've gone from losing a lot of money to essentially operating at break-even. It's a tremendous amount of progress, and it's only been accomplished because of a tremendous amount of hard work by all the individuals involved. Every time I go out and meet with them, I'm just blown away by how hard they're all working in putting together essentially a global customer service system run out of the UK, they put together a SAP system all on their own, and so on and so forth. And they've been doing a tremendous job, and they have been growing. But if you look at the chart on the right, which was the goals that had been set at the time that the business was set up in early 2003, the objective was to grow very quickly, to essentially grow to a point where there was critical mass, that there was the ability to leverage the costs of running a standalone global organization and deliver good profitability over those 2 years. The chart on the right illustrates now what's happened. Now, there were some, you can see a little white bar there. There were some markets that were exited or business models that were changed. There was also, for the first year and a bit, some lubricants that were sold through the car care business because of concerns about conflicts that might exist with the ShellLubricants organization selling both the PQS brands and their own brands. But when you strip that out, we started at about a 73 index. In other words, about 27% smaller than we had even thought when we sent the objectives. And the next year's performance was up about 15 or 16% on a like-to-like basis from 73 to 84 index. And 15% is pretty good, but you can see that the critical mass isn't really developing, and that the objectives for this year probably will bring us back to something a little bit better than where we thought we were starting in 2003. And as a result of that, what you've got is you've got a relatively subscale business, and you still have those costs that you were looking at, although they've continued to save a lot of money. The basic infrastructure of trying to run the standalone business and everything is such that clearly the opportunity here is to focus the organization against the key markets out there, and to really make it right-sized, fit for purpose, so to speak, is the best thing to do. The other benefit, the other issue is around the product stewardship area. To give the international team some credit, they actually were on top of this, I think, earlier and with a bit more passion than we even have had in the U.S. They've been going after it, but it is also very, very hard to achieve all that compliance when you're dealing in so many different countries, and the regulations are so different in every different country. It's almost an impossible task without really quite a significant infrastructure against it. So against those three objectives, those are the three that I spoke about before: growth, earnings, and I said here group principles and HSE, but it really goes down to product stewardship and everything. They've made a lot of progress, but there remain significant issues. So if I was to stop like this, I'd say that on the growth dimension we're yellow, or as the English like to say, amber. We did very well for a while. I continue to have faith that we can do well. I see no reason why we can't do well, but last year wasn't very good. When you're looking at the customer advantage, I think we're a solid green. We've done well with it. We're continuing to take advantage of it, and I think the results have spoken for themselves. However, when you look at the stewardship type issues, it's a very solid red. So you've got a mixed scorecard here. It's very important to the business, but it's not performing very well for the reasons I've outlined, and therefore our objectives are to get back onto track in terms of growth, developing our brands. We should have much stronger brands than we have today, and accelerating the growth through innovation. Improving our profitability, and the specific learning from last year is get better visibility and ownership of the cost and the margin issues. Safe and legal products. As we've discussed, that remains a significant gap and an unacceptable situation. And to what I say is right-size international here, to focus on the key markets and rescale the business to essentially fit that potential. So, given that scorecard, the question then is, how do you fix it? And the root cause that I became convinced of, and Jim Nichols became convinced of, and John Craig, who I had a number of conversations about this with earlier, we all agreed that the core problem was that essentially the business had gone through a transformation and globalization. We all had become part of a much bigger team, and as a result we were all lining up around different sets of priorities, and it was difficult for us to resolve a lot of our issues, especially since we're trying to transform the business simultaneously on so many different levels, that we needed to essentially pull it back down to, instead of being number 4 or 5 priority on everybody's list, let's make it number 1 priority on a smaller group's list. It's a very simple observation, but one that just rings very true to me and the other people involved in this assessment. So instead of us being pulled in different directions, let's take a smaller group of people and focus them around getting this business fixed right. And so we came to the conclusion that we needed to establish a global organization, combining the functions that were involved in the announcement yesterday, that clearly some functions such as HR, finance and analysis, procurement, are run in a global cross class of business, essentially downstream wide, or in the case of finance and analysis, actually group wide basis. We will respect that. We certainly aren't going to challenge that. However, we're going to have much more clearly carved out and dedicated teams that are aligned against it, just as F&A is against the different lines of business today. Now, the sales organizations in the United States and Canada work very well, and that the confusing the customer with having two different faces would be a very counterproductive thing. So those organizations will continue to operate as they are operating today. And just as, for example, Jim McCormick's team in Bentonville or Steve Reindel's team here in Houston or around the country that are managing those accounts handle the different product lines for transport and consumer, they will also handle it for car care, and there'll be essentially a sales delivery plan there. But what we've got to do, and I don't really think this is necessarily the right name to give this project, so to speak, but the spirit and the direction of it is that we need to establish our leadership across a number of dimensions. We need to establish it around our product integrity and the risks that we are presenting from a safety and a legal standpoint, that we're establishing our leadership from a brand standpoint, and we're establishing our leadership in the markets in which we elect to compete in. I believe that our fundamental competitive advantages in this business rest with our customers, our very close knowledge of them, and the synergies that we bring them because we represent such a broad perspective around the automotive category, and also in our ability to build strong brands and our ability to innovate and provide change and fuel their growth, which will has implications in terms of how we organize our supply network in such a way that we can be flexible and support innovation in that changing marketplace. So that's the basic direction that we're going to be going forward, and how we plan to compete and how we're going to organize ourselves. Now, to be a little more specific about it, let me put up a organization chart. I hope you can read that in the back, Susan, Eric, and everybody, but I'll be very simple. But the green box is the general manager of Global Car Care. That individual will report to me. The yellow boxes are the functions that will report directly to that general manager: supply chain manager, product management manager, the chemicals marketing, accessories marketing, international marketing, and international sales. So those functions will report directly in. The two functions that are within the overall supply chain family, supply chain manager and product management, will have a very strong dotted line back to their parent. The standards and the systems and the information exchange and the participation in the global meetings and everything should continue as if they were a formal member of that function. But Jim and I shared the view that without having this very strong line, the primary line being back into car care, we were not going to get that focus around solving the problems that we've just outlined. The blue boxes on the right are the organizations that are part of either the global organizations such as finance and HR, or the national account Walmart sales teams. I neglected to put up there the Canadian piece of it, but all those sales teams will continue as they are. So there's sort of a dotted line SLA or support function that is there. The white boxes that are below the yellow boxes are really there. I want to highlight they're there for sort of descriptive purposes to talk about the functions that will be captured within that manager. They're not designed to indicate what the team structure will be underneath it. For example, accessories marketing, there's air fresheners, seat covers, sun and organization, and product design innovation. That may not reflect how that organization's structured. That's just more the buckets of work, so to speak, conceptually, that will be captured within that organization. To put a timeline on this, today is the 4th of March. For those of you who haven't checked, we're announcing the scope, objectives, and timeline around this. On Monday, we'll be posting the job in the Open Resource Network for the general manager. So that will be up on Monday. And then about 3 weeks later, we expect to be able to appoint a general manager to that role and trigger the next stage. The next stage would be the L2 positions, and we're going to apply the very consistent rule that's been applied in the past and in other phases of organizational change. If an individual's job is changed by more than 30%, then we'll post that position, and if it is not, then they would be named to fill that role. So we'll announce the general manager and trigger the second stage, and then about 3 weeks later, appoint the remaining L2s, the yellow boxes I just discussed, and do the same thing with L3s. At the same time, I expect that we would be able to, giving the general manager a good 3 or 4 weeks, plus the time we've got between now and then, to do a review of the international markets. We should be able to understand what our position is about which markets we'll continue in and which ones we won't, and be able to sort of have a conclusion about what the right-sized organization there looks like. About 3 weeks after that, appoint the L3 positions. I promised the LET that in about 4 months we'll update them on the progress in terms of where we stand as an organization and the issues that have come up. And in about 2 years, give an update on the stoplight that I went through. Essentially, those three things of growth, customer advantage, and the risks that we're presenting to the group. I think it's a very good plan, and it's natural that every couple of years you're going to step back on a business like this and say, is it achieving the goals that we set for it? And that's pretty much the car care piece of it. I suggest that we, just in the interest of time and everything, we roll right through the innovation and the sales customer development organization changes, and then open it up for questions. So, innovation. I've talked about innovation a bit already. It clearly was one of the major catalysts. The car care change is one of the major catalysts for this change in innovation. There was no way I could see the car care organization operating effectively against the vision that I just spoke about without having the responsibility for innovation being a part of that team. But what I saw as I evaluated this, discussed with Andrew, discussed with the other region managers, was that beyond just the car care component of it, on the lubricant side as well, there was more distance between the regional and the global strategy, brand strategy, but in particular at the regional level, more distance between the regions and the innovation team than was constructive. And this is, I say here, especially important in North America, where innovation is a critical component of the business strategy. North American market, as you all know, is our highest share market. It's a mature market. The lubricants business isn't growing here. Oil drain interval is actually dragging the category down. The innovation is an absolutely critical way for us to be differentiating ourselves, to be driving growth, to be driving margin trade-up. So we need to make sure that if it works anywhere, it works there. So the separation between the regional teams as well as the car care piece led me to the conclusion that if the purpose of having a global organization was to essentially establish best practice communication and to build a center of excellence, we can accomplish most of that with a network of people that are formally tied into the regions rather than the reverse. Essentially, exchange the dotted and the straight lines. Now, this chart summarizes the North American innovation stream over the last couple of years. And I want to emphasize, this is not a comment about the people that are involved in it. I think the people that are involved in the work are great, and I'm going to be working with them going forward. But it does highlight that the results right now are not where we need them to be, which is the main point in including this chart. For those of you who have been with the PQS organization previous to the acquisition, you may remember when we set this thing up, we set a goal of 5% of revenue coming from products that were less than 2 years old. And we were ramping up pretty well there now. You can argue, Pennzoil High Mileage is still there. In fact, it grew quite well last year. Blades aren't on there, but obviously these things keep on growing. But the basic discipline that innovation organizations use, by most famously 3M, is they all have a period of time where these things fall off the radar screen and need to be replenished, because if they're not replenished, then you're living on previous innovations rather than keeping the pipeline there. We made the decision somewhat arbitrarily to give ourselves a 2-year window so that we could allow for some distribution build and some maturity in the products to come through, but nevertheless, we're struggling to come up with the big ideas that are going to get us up to that 5% level. So the change that we're going to make is going to take, it says car care innovation, it really refers to the team that exists within innovation today, which is really around the chemicals and innovation, would report into the chemicals marketing as part of the car care marketing. I say here accessories needs to strengthen its new product development capability. I know Robert's already focused on that, but this is just sort of a prod to maybe push that even harder. North American lubricants innovation, we report into Andy Kokari's North American Lubes organization. The other regions, so Latin America, Asia Pacific, Europe. You like my 2-letter acronyms there? That's how I keep things brief. They will report into the regional marketing managers. I say here review of linkage to the regional project priorities to be completed, because I think that when we make this change, it's important that the region managers, the innovation team, that the general managers all sit down and say, are we deploying our resources against the most effective priorities in the market, et cetera, and that process needs to be undertaken. And that the central team here that's doing the global development and pipeline management would report into Lee Qualls, the Global Brand Strategy Organization. I say there that review of scope is to be completed, meaning that there's some areas that I feel that the consumer organization has been lagging in, especially compared to transport and industry recently. We have a very complex slate of formulas out there. We need to really figure out. We had a great conversation earlier, well, it wasn't earlier, it was in the middle of last month when we were together about the opportunities not only to save costs, but to get really kind of fit for purpose formulas around the different specifications that exist in the different markets. And we haven't been providing the right input, guidance, priority, leadership on that agenda, and that's something that we really need to do going forward. And exactly what the mix of accountabilities are in that bucket and how that's done is something that I think we need to do some more work on going forward over the next couple of weeks. That's innovation. So let me now move on to sales and customer development. This isn't as significant of a change, but it's a pretty exciting one in my opinion, and it's one that I wanted to take advantage of the opportunity, especially with so many people here in the U.S., to perhaps open up the windows a bit and give you a view about how the business operates in some other markets, because this is really what this is directed in many respects around, is how to increase our capability in many of those growth markets. But when you look at the past year, moving into this year, it became clear we got our foundation done pretty well last year from a channel marketing standpoint. We understood our channels much better. We standardized our definitions. We understood how important they were. We understood what the key CVP elements were going to be in the different markets. We built differentiators or edges into it, and that's all really good stuff. And you need to keep those things fresh, but importantly, you need to get into putting them into practice in the marketplace. And instead of continuing on that development path, what we realized we needed to do is we needed to evolve our challenge to reflect our growing maturity in this respect and move into an implementation mode very much in alignment with the global work stream around Salesforce effectiveness. We needed to build our sales competency to implement those CVPs, implement the route to market improvements, and in addition to SPANCO, which is a really important sales process and one that makes sense not only for consumers, I'll show you in a second, in many of our channels, but also very broadly is used really almost universally by the transport sales teams and industry sales teams. We have this concept of the Shell drill, which is part of what I wanted to share with you today. And in light of that, we're broadening the concept of the organization from channel marketing to sales and customer development. Now, this chart may be a little bit difficult to see, but in my mind, there are two broad customer classifications out there. There are the organizations that you would use consultative selling processes with. Those are customers that you're either contracting with or customers that either in a formal or informal manner will either be exclusive or will have distinct roles for different vendors in different parts of their manufacturing process or their retail shelves, for that matter. In those accounts, which would include fleets, car dealers, mining, power, agriculture, hypermarkets such as Walmart, U.S. Fast Lubes, a contracted channel, metalworking or manufacturing, once again spanning all those different customer classifications. The SpanCo process and the key account management disciplines really make all the sense in the world. However, in many markets, I'll show you in a second, you have a very different type of a sales process. You have what I'm calling a daily selling process, because every day is a scrum. Every day you're in there battling for shelf space. We battle for shelf space in the auto zones of the world, but those things are generally done once a year or twice a year. Here you're doing it literally every day. Hey, get rid of that guy. I want that shelf. I deserve it. So you're doing a daily battle for a share of shelf, and it's a very merchandising-driven business. These accounts are really open hunting in terms of merchandising material, and the consumers are very, very brand-driven. Those would be little auto specialty shops in markets in many of the developing countries, independent car workshops, bikes. The motorcycle business is very much this way. Fast Lubes outside the U.S. I wish you could see that picture back very well. It's interesting. In the U.S., Fast Lubes are generally exclusive or near exclusive. 85% is the type of rule that we lay out there in our contracts. In most other countries in the world, Fast Lube business is, they'll carry every brand under the sun. The consumer will select the brand. They'll may get encouraged by the operator for the product that he's making the most money on, but everything's available in there, and therefore your ability to drive the business is very different than our ability here, where it's contracted. And truck Fast Lubes are very similar. So it's not just a consumer thing. The owner-operator segment in transport very much operates in this. And in this area, we're concentrating on the drill. Now, just to give you an illustration, this is probably more information than you'll ever want to know, but I'll go through it very quickly. In North America, you'll see I was generous and I put IWS in there. And really, many of the IWS channels, the independent workshops, are contracted. So they really probably don't even belong in that segment. But you can see it's a small slice of the North American business and a relatively small slice of Europe. But when you look at Asia and Latin America, over half of the market falls into the category of these multi-branded independent workshops or multi-branded auto specialty shops where you're in there elbowing for shelf space, or multi-branded Fast Lubes. And these channels really don't work under a SpanCo process. SpanCo is one way. You go from suspect down to order, and you're contracted. Actually, that's the C. This is not a contract world. This is a world where every day is a sale. So we've developed this sales process, which is repeated. It's for those of you who have worked in a snack business, a beverage business, or a candy business. This is the way all those businesses operate. Even razor blades work this way. It's up and down the street, and it's just going in there, and it's the discipline. It's the discipline around which that sales organization penetrates the market and repeatedly calls on those customers and develops the merchandising position that is one of the core competitive strategies that exist. And the better you are at that, the more market share you're going to have. And the more market share you're going to have, the lower the cost you've got, because it's, once again, it's very much a fixed cost, leverage cost kind of a basis, and the stronger your brand is. And these channels are the channels that you make a lot of money in. You make a lot more money in these channels if you're managing them well than you make in a franchise workshop or a car dealer. These are the channels that are the core of the business in the fastest growing markets of the world, Asia to be precise. So given that, we needed to get really good at this, and we're setting this sales process up as really a parallel process to SpanCo for the relevant channels. Very simply, this is Sami Aouda's organization, and what we're doing is we're combining some of the groups on the left-hand side, combining some of the CVP development and implementation teams, redeploying some resources so that we can do both the distributor management, the route to market work, as well as the daily sales management, and strengthening the resources that are available at the regional level to help implement those, particularly in the Asia Pacific and Latin American markets. And that summarizes those changes. I'd just like to wrap it up by saying, if you go through all three of these, the car care, the innovation, and the sales development changes, I think you'll see that they're all really good changes. They're changes that are designed to build on the learning of the last year and improve our effectiveness. They're changes that are designed to help us grow more rapidly, improve our profitability, provide safe products, and beat our competition. So at this point, I've gone through those changes. I'd like to open it up for any questions. I guess we'll start with people that are here, and then questions that have come in on the webcast will get fed to me. We're going to, for the interest of those on the webcast, we're going to have people handing microphones out. Please hold them relatively close to your mouths so that the questions could be heard by those on the webcast. Yes.
Doug, would you be prepared at this time to talk about your thoughts on improving the cost of goods sold, since that was the primary gap in 2004?
Well, I don't have a list of projects. I could call on some of the people in supply chain or in the brand groups to provide that list, but that might not be the best use of the time. I think it's important that we go through really the large volume products and the products where our margins have been most squeezed. We've had Paul Smith just actually sent me a note today saying that compared to our plan, we have $16 million of cost increases above our plan level. So that certainly gives us a lot of content to go focus against. But it's going to be working very closely with the procurement folks, as well as working very closely with the manufacturing operations people in Cleveland and Meta and in Baltimore to really work through how we take those costs out. But I don't have a specific list with me on that point. Is anybody involved in those businesses from a day-to-day standpoint and want to focus on one or two specific ones, or shall we just move on to the next question? I guess we'll move on to the next question. Yeah. Yes. Well, could you wait for the microphone, please?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I'm really excited about this new organization. I think there's a lot of opportunity here in terms of focus, but it also feels like from an acceleration standpoint that increasing budgets would be a helpful part of the whole program as well. Is there a vision to drive more marketing budget as part of this? Well,
I admit it is a challenge to increase budgets when you're in a cost environment as we are in right now. As it's netting out, we're increasing our budgets a bit from last year to this year. In particular, what we're doing is repositioning our budgets, moving it from one region to another region and around. The growth markets out there are going to, even with the budget holdback, see a material increase in their budgets. Markets such as the United States are really probably going to be operating from a more flat type of a budget situation. But there's an awful lot of money that gets freed up within that. We continue to redeploy. I know, just speaking of the lubes business here in the States, and Andy and his team have been taking money out of a number of areas that as contracts expire or whatever, and redeploying it back against places that we see a lot of potential in. I think we've got some very good initiatives underway with the Quaker State and the Pennzoil programs. I know Paul has been focusing his budgets around a couple of big brands and trying to develop those. I wish that we could have, really bottomless dollars on that point, but especially after last year's performance, we really owe the organization and frankly ourselves making our targets this year. And we're really dealing in an extraordinary time from a cost standpoint. So we're not balancing our P&L on the backs of the expenses, but we need to make sure that we're managing those very responsibly right now. But we're having a very active dialogue. We set up our plans at the beginning of the year in such a way that we're able to control this in a reasonably rational and controlled manner. People aren't, throwing things out the window and burning furniture, but, it's a tight year. And it's appropriately a tight year in light of where we are. You have my commitment that, and I'll do this again as we go into next year's plans, to plan on giving ourselves the flexibility to go after the growth opportunities going forward. Those are growth markets, growth products in all the markets. And we'll do it again as we go into the year, and hopefully we'll have more favorable or at least stable cost environments so that we can actually drive against that single-mindedly. Yes.
A lot of feedback. Quick question. You make mention of the global solutions. Presumably resources out there remain intact?
Well, we're not materially changing the global solutions budget. We have trimmed it a bit from the targets in the plan. We've been doing that very much with our global solutions liaison, Imen. All areas are feeling some tightness in the budget spending, but these changes here don't drive any change in that respect itself. I think there may be some evolution in the projects, especially as we focus more around how we rationalize and more carefully manage our formula portfolio around the business opportunities and try to squeeze unnecessary costs out of those formulas, because we have a very complicated and in some respects probably over-engineered slate. So that may drive a greater share of our attention than it has in the past, but I don't see a major or material change in that respect. Yes.
Doug, just a quick question. If I understood correctly, North America sales will continue to be combined. Why would that not be the case for international? Why not combine the lubricants and the car care sales to leverage, especially in Asia or in Latin America, where you have to go against those channels where it's, day-to-day fighting against shelf space and, build those competencies for both car care and lubricants?
Well, I would encourage the international car care team to go into key customers arm in arm with lubricants. I think they should be working very cooperatively together. However, to be honest and to be practical, if we asked the lubricants organization to essentially sell car care, and we don't need to have an international car care organization, we probably wouldn't have very much in terms of international car care sales. It just is not at a critical mass enough yet to really get that attention. So as a result, we need to have those dedicated resources around international car care if we're going to get the growth that we would want to in that business. But they should be working together arm in arm with the key customers. And there are some instances, probably the best development example internationally that I can think of is the Shell retail business, where we've taken category management. Actually, Shell International Car Care is really leading the category management with Shell retail. There are other wins, with Walmart in Germany, et cetera, but that's probably the best example, and we should work very cooperatively. I haven't heard of instances where we're not working cooperatively, but I think the distinct focus around it is really necessary in order to get the growth that we would like to have. Yes?
We have one that came on the internet. Is category management going to be a larger focus in the global organization moving forward? If so, why does it report in through sales instead of being a standalone branch of the organization to make sure we approach category management effectively and with the correct focus?
Well, it's reporting in that chart that I showed on Car Care International, or the international, the global car care organization, based on conversations that I have had with Nick The reason, if I understood the question correctly, the reason why it's not being set up as a global organization, sort of integrating the category management at Walmart and at the U.S. national accounts and international car carriers. And probably the best example I could use would be to point to some of the learning on the innovation side. I think what we've found is that these teams need to be very tightly focused and very, working very closely together. If we set up the category management function as a distinct function separate than the sales teams, I think we would probably find an unhealthy amount of space between the sales teams and the category management teams. It's very important that they stay tight together and that they exchange best practices. In fact, I think that suggestion of sort of institutionalizing a more regular exchange there would be a very good idea, but they are appropriately tied to the sales teams rather than set up as a distinct function. Others? Yes.
Will the filters fall within car care?
Well, I see the filters staying within the lubricants organization, even though they're non-liquid products. They're very, very linked into the basic CVP for the installed sales organization. So that would stay there as well as antifreeze. Other areas? Yes, please.
Question. One of the slides showed fewer, stronger brands. Is it our intention to remove some brands from our portfolio as far as chemicals go? Or do you see possibly adding brands, remove some and then add some?
I mean, I'd always be open to both. I do think that it's important, and this has been a strategy that I know Paul and Frank have been discussing. And while I don't know much about the details on it, intuitively I very much support it, which is that what we need to do is we need to build real category leadership brands, the mega brands that really dominate a category. We want to knock McGuire's, for example, off its perch in appearance, and we're going to do that by focusing our resources around a brand rather than spreading ourselves thin or treating brands like items on a charm bracelet. So I think we need to really concentrate our efforts there, and that means that in some brands, will either be milking or, weaning away. We went through a cycle of that in 2002, for those of you who remember. Brad led a lot of that work back then, and we probably will go through another phase of that right now. I don't have a lot of interest in selling brands that don't make any money. And there are a few of those in our portfolio today. We might be just a lot better off avoiding the distractions and the inventory management and the ordering and the compliance issues and everything else by not distracting ourselves with those products at this stage. So, but I know that's where Paul's head is and Robert's head is on these issues as well. So, but I don't have any specific names on my list.
Thanks for this opportunity. Will we be bringing in the global sales discounts and allowances into this car care business?
Well, each of this business unit is defined by the products, and those products will carry the sales discounts and allowances. Yes, absolutely, that are associated with them. Most of the programs that we have with our major customers are defined by the products, so that shouldn't be a complicated process or one that leads to a lot of arbitrary allocation triggers. But so they will be in it, yes, and they are in the financials that I talked about. I think we've gotten pretty good about that. We still need to, as Mark Carroll has been learning over the last year or doing over the last year, still need to bring those things more and more visible and more under control because there's potentially a lot of leakage there. But that's not unique to the U.S. That's true globally for our business as a whole. So we're going to be sending out a little questionnaire, as you're used to doing at the end of the town halls. I'm very interested in getting your feedback on this series of announcements. I mean, do they make sense to you? Were they clear? As well as areas that you may want to ask me questions more privately, so to speak, or feel free to stop by and ask me face to face. Obviously, each of these things there are some areas, in particular in the car care and in the innovation announcement, where there's some unanswered questions, so to speak. And that's natural. And if we waited all the way till we knew all the answers to that, then it would be frustrating for everybody to wait till then. So the best thing to do is to get this out. You know our intent going forward now. I think it's a very positive story, but there's going to be some uncertainty as we go through this. And just bear with us as we go through it. You have my absolute commitment to get through that uncertainty as quickly as possible so that we can all concentrate on growing, becoming more profitable, and beating our competition, as well as providing, the right products in the marketplace. So, thank you very much. Appreciate it.